The morning sun rose over the northeastern United States and southern Canada on May 31st, 1985, casting a warm spring glow across the region. It felt calm, ordinary, but hidden above that tranquil sky, the atmosphere was coiled like a spring, ready to snap. By nightfall, the skies would erupt with unimaginable violence. Towns would be erased, lives would be changed forever, and one of the most destructive tornado outbreaks in North American history would leave a scar still felt to this day. Over the span of just 8 hours, more than 40 tornadoes would tear across Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Ontario. And for me, growing up in Pittsburgh, learning about this outbreak and regularly visiting the towns it devastated lit a fire inside me. A fascination with weather that's never gone away. Today, we're going back to relive the fury of the 1985 US-Canada tornado outbreak, uncover the science behind what made it catastrophic, and understand how its legacy still impacts us nearly 40 years later. I'm CJ, and this is Florida Man Weather. Friday, May 31st, 1985. The day began for most just like any other late spring day. Temperatures across the region that morning were warmer than average, although they weren't overly above average. But as the day progressed, one of the most volatile atmospheric setups in recorded history was building over southern Ontario, eastern Ohio, and western Pennsylvania. The first ominous signs of what would become a historic outbreak emerged shortly after 1:30 p.m. as thunderstorms began to bubble to life across southern Ontario. At first, they appeared typical for a late spring day, but by 3, the true nature of the atmosphere began to reveal itself. That hour, the first confirmed tornado of the day, a moderate F2, touched down near Rush Cove, Ontario, marking the beginning of what would become a cross-border catastrophe. And at nearly the same time, the volatile silence over Ohio and Pennsylvania was shattered. The atmospheric cap that had suppressed convection suddenly eroded, and by 3, explosive supercell development ignited across northeast Ohio. These supercells began a rapid eastward march toward the PA border, poised to unleash unprecedented destruction. By 4:10, the first severe thunderstorm warning was issued for Ashtabula County, Ohio. At 4:25 p.m., the National Severe Storms Forecast Center would issue Tornado Watch number 211, covering all of eastern Ohio, western Pennsylvania, southwestern New York, and parts of the Great Lakes region. The clock was now ticking. At 4:59 p.m. Eastern Time, the United States saw its first violent tornado of the outbreak. Just west of the Ohio-PA state line, an F4 tornado would touch down and tear through the small borough of Albion, Pennsylvania in Erie County. It ripped through residential neighborhoods, leveling 2 trailer parks and shredded homes to their foundations. 9 people would lose their lives in Albion, with 3 more fatalities in the nearby borough of Cranesville. Over 80 were injured, and aerial photos revealed a catastrophic swath of destruction. Meanwhile, to the north, just before 5 Eastern, one of the most violent and destructive tornadoes in Canadian history would strike Barrie, a suburb of Toronto in Ontario. This F4, with wind speeds exceeding 400 kilometers an hour, that's 249 freedom units, obliterated neighborhoods and industrial zones in a matter of minutes. It tore through a dense pine forest, snapping 10-meter tall trees like matchsticks before carving a path through the Crawford Street and Patterson Road subdivision, where 5 people were killed. This storm would then move on to Molson Park, destroying at least 16 factories, twisting the steel I-beams and embedding wooden splinters into concrete walls. It jumped Highway 400, tossing vehicles and wrapping guardrails around poles. One man was reportedly sucked from his parked car and was tossed and killed by the tornado. As it neared Minette's Point Marina, it picked up nearly 30 boats out of the water with their concrete moorings still attached and hurled them into Lake Simcoe. The tornado, cloaked in heavy rain and dust, was also nearly invisible, adding to its creepiness and its deadliness. By 5:30, another tornado had touched down in Erie County, Pennsylvania, near the small town of Corry. This F4 would travel 28 miles, destroying over 50 buildings in Erie and Warren counties before crossing over into Chautauqua County, New York. Though miraculously no one was killed, 12 people would be injured and farms would be flattened. Then, at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, near the Ravenna Arsenal in Portage County, Ohio, the atmosphere gave rise to what would become the most infamous tornado of the day. This tornado would drop out of the sky, already producing F4 damage, and then intensify into an F5, and it still is the only F5 tornado ever recorded in Pennsylvania. This monster would tear through Newton Falls, Ohio, a small suburb of Youngstown, where nearly 400 homes would be damaged or destroyed. Due to timely warnings and operational sirens, however, the town thankfully suffered no fatalities, a stunning exception for that day. As the tornado then charged into the next town, Niles, Ohio, the consequences would turn grim. Entire neighborhoods would be wiped off the map, and the Niles Park Plaza shopping center would be partially swept away, its steel beams mangled like tinfoil. A retirement home, a roller rink, and multiple 75,000-pound petroleum tanks would be obliterated in Niles. Crossing the border from Ohio into Pennsylvania and entering the small town of Wheatland, the tornado would reach its peak strength, over a half a mile wide, and retaining its F5 intensity. It vaporized a steel frame trucking plant and scoured pavement from the parking lots, leaving routing slips jammed beneath the asphalt layers. Survivors said it looked like a war zone. The borough of Wheatland would lose 95% of its business and residential infrastructure. In all, the tornado would claim 18 lives, 9 of which were in Niles and 7 of which were in Wheatland, and would injure over 310 people. Even with this devastation, the outbreak was far from over. Around 7 o'clock, another F4 tornado would touch down near Cornelian, Ohio, rampaging across Trumbull County and then into Pennsylvania through the counties of Mercer, Crawford, and Venango. Though it caused damage in towns like Jamestown, Cochranton, and Cooperstown, it would be most remembered for its devastation in Atlantic and Cherry Tree Township. Both of those towns saw 5 people lose their lives each as the tornado leveled a mobile home park, crumpled a communications tower, and carved a 56-mile path that left 16 people in total dead. At approximately the same time, another violent tornado, over a mile wide, touched down in Venango County and moved east into Forest County, striking the small community of German Hill near Tionesta at F4 intensity. 7 people were killed, their bodies thrown hundreds of feet, and one check from the tornado's debris was later found 140 miles away in Elmira, New York. The storm devastated the Allegheny National Forest, resulting in millions of dollars in timber loss. And at 7:30, the largest and most visually striking tornado of the outbreak would roar through central Pennsylvania's wilderness. An F4 with a size of up to 2 miles wide would tear a 69-mile path through the Moshannon State Forest, snapping nearly 90,000 trees. The destruction was so severe and the tornado was so strong, it was actually picked up by a Penn State seismograph. And though its wrath was immense, thankfully only one person was injured, a miracle owed to its remote track through the Appalachians. By 8:30 p.m., the danger would now reach the outskirts of Pittsburgh, as an F3 tornado would barrel through Beaver and Butler counties. It struck densely populated suburban areas, demolishing a shopping center near Beaver Falls, tossing vehicles like leaves, and killing 9 people. Over 100 more were injured along the storm's 39-mile track through Pittsburgh's northwestern and northern suburbs. At 8:17 p.m., the small town of Kane, Pennsylvania, was then struck by yet another F4 tornado. Kane Middle School was hit directly, windows and doors being blown out, and clocks around the town had stopped at the moment of impact. 3 people died, and a 4th succumbed to injuries in the weeks that follow. More than 100 structures were damaged or destroyed, and by nightfall, the sky, while it had finally calmed, the land below was unrecognizable. In the span of less than 10 hours, over 40 tornadoes had struck the northeastern United States and southern Ontario. It was not just an outbreak, it was a meteorological assault, one of the most violent ever recorded in North America's northern tier. On May 31st, 1985, the skies over the northeastern United States and southern Canada looked calm, but the atmosphere was anything but. At the center of it all was a powerful low-pressure system, a swirling mass of air at the surface that essentially reshapes the weather patterns. This one was unusually intense, registering at a very low 984 millibars, almost equivalent to a Category 2 hurricane, and it was pulling enormous amounts of warm, humid air up from the Gulf of Mexico. Temperatures throughout the day shot into the upper 80s, and dew points soared into the 60s and 70s, the air becoming thick, sticky, and unstable, the kind of environments storms feed on. But there was more than just warm, humid air. Higher up in the atmosphere, several critical layers were setting the stage for disaster. About 4,500 feet above the surface, a river of even more warm and moist air rushed in. And just above that, a pocket of much drier air moved in from the plains, which cooled the mid-levels and made it even easier for air near the surface to rise. And still higher, almost 18,000 feet above the ground, a massive trough of low pressure tilted in just the right way to create a strong upward motion over a huge area. This stacked combination of forces meant that once storms formed, they would explode in strength. The winds themselves also played a critical role. At the ground, winds were blowing from the south and southeast, while higher up, the winds would shift dramatically in direction and became much faster, blowing hard from the west. This difference in wind direction and speed with height, something we call wind shear, creates the spin needed for supercells, the powerful rotating thunderstorms that can spawn tornadoes. Yet, despite all of this, the atmosphere seemed to hold its breath for most of the day. A thin layer of warm, stable air, you hear commonly called a cap, acted like a lid on a boiling pot of water, keeping all of that energy bottled up just a couple thousand feet above the ground. But then, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that lid would blow off and the atmosphere would explode. In minutes, clouds that had been small and harmless would shoot upward tens of thousands of feet. These towering storm clouds, now some large enough to be seen from dozens of miles away, erupted all the way up from eastern Ohio into western Pennsylvania and southern Ontario. And these weren't just ordinary thunderstorms. They were massive, moisture-heavy supercells. Many of these tornadoes were actually wrapped in rain, hiding them inside until it was too late to see or hear them coming. On radar, meteorologists would see those telltale hook echo shapes, a sign that tornadoes were forming, and in many cases, those tornadoes were already on the ground. But what made this outbreak so devastating wasn't just the number of tornadoes, but their sheer power. These storms ripped through hills and valleys with no slowdown, carving swaths of destruction miles wide. In the Moshannon State Forest in Pennsylvania, one tornado would leave a track so massive it had looked like a giant had stamped out the trees. Researchers would later realize that these tornadoes were multi-vortex, containing smaller satellite funnels that would spin around the main vortex and widen the damage path even further. And then there was the most infamous tornado of them all, the F5 that would tear through Niles, Ohio, and Wheatland, Pennsylvania. That tornado was so violent, it actually left behind a signature on radar, one that we now call a tornado debris ball. What meteorologists didn't realize at the time, they were seeing a signature that didn't just show the rain, but debris. This was pieces of homes, cars, and trees lofted thousands of feet into the air. And on the ground, this tornado would actually scour parking lots clean of its asphalt, sweeping entire houses off their foundations and reduced an entire neighborhood to splinters. Winds in the storm were estimated to have exceeded 260 miles per hour, making it the first and only F5 tornado ever recorded in Pennsylvania. When the sun rose again on June 1st, 1985, the people of western Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, southwestern New York, and southern Ontario were greeted with a completely changed world. Towns were left unrecognizable. Forests were stripped bare, and entire neighborhoods that had stood just 24 hours before were nothing more than jagged foundations and scattered debris. Across the northeastern United States and southern Ontario, these tornadoes that had torn through the landscape the previous day had left behind not just destruction, but a wound, a scar that would shape lives and communities for decades. Nearly 90 people had lost their lives, and another 1,000 plus were critically injured. Their lives forever altered in an instant. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had, unfortunately, bore the worst of it. 65 deaths, most in small towns that had little warning and no precedent of the scale of destruction that they would endure. The Wheatland F5, the most powerful tornado of the outbreak, claimed several lives and it injured 310 as it tore through Ohio and Pennsylvania. Other violent tornadoes, like the Albion F4 and the Atlantic F4, killed 12 and 16 people respectively, leaving trails of devastation across the hills and valleys of the Rust Belt. On the other side of Lake Erie, in Barrie, Ontario, the deadliest tornado in Canada since 1912 killed 8, injured 155, and flattened entire neighborhoods and industrial parks. Rural Ontario would see another 4 lives lost, as a violent tornado would rip through the small farming town of Grand Valley. The numbers, however, only tell part of the story. Behind them were families shattered, livelihoods destroyed, and many communities forever changed. Many victims died in mobile homes that offered no protection from the monstrous winds. Others perished in site-built homes that simply weren't built to withstand the force of an F4 and F5. Roofs separated from walls, walls separated from foundations, and the entire structure would end up obliterated. Canada actually responded in 1995 with sweeping updates to its national building code, mandating continuous load paths, a construction principle ensuring that roofs, walls, and foundations were tied together to resist uplift. But even then, most existing homes were not retrofitted, and insurance policies rarely incentivized building stronger. The vulnerabilities remained quietly, waiting for the next outbreak. And the environmental toll was also staggering. In Pennsylvania alone, the Moshannon F4 tore through the wilderness so violently that over 90,000 trees were obliterated in minutes. The Allegheny National Forest lost millions in timber. Oaks and pines 3 feet in diameter were snapped or debarked as if they were twigs. For years, aerial photographs showed brown scars cutting through green forests, some which will never fully recover. The economic toll was no less severe. Property damage across the US and Canada topped $600 million in 1985 dollars, equivalent to more than $1.7 billion today. Towns like Wheatland, Barrie, Atlantic, and Grand Valley were left in economic ruin. In Barrie alone, 16 factories were destroyed, leaving over 400 people out of work overnight. In Wheatland would lose 95% of its business and residential areas, effectively almost erasing the town from the map. Some communities, like Grand Valley, were able to rebuild within a year. Others took far longer, or really didn't at all in the case of Wheatland. Most importantly, the outbreak also shattered a dangerous myth, the one that I remember hearing constantly when I was growing up in Western Pennsylvania, that tornadoes couldn't hit us because of the hills. The terrain would protect us. But on May 31st, 1985, that illusion was violently torn away. Multiple F4s and even an F5 roared across rolling hills, plunged into valleys, climbed mountains, leveled forests, and obliterated industrial towns. Terrain offered and still offers no protection. Nowhere was really ever safe. And in the years that followed, the lessons of the outbreak fueled dramatic changes in how we forecast and warn for severe weather. Most importantly, the nationwide deployment of the WSR-88D or NEXRAD Doppler radar network in the 1990s and the addition of dual polarization technology in the 2000s finally allowed meteorologists to detect rotation and debris signatures with unprecedented accuracy. But yet, complacency has quietly crept back in. Decades have passed without another outbreak of that scale in the Great Lakes or the Northeast. Preparedness budgets have shrank and public awareness fades with time. The lessons of 1985 are at a risk of being forgotten, but forgetting is dangerous because the 1985 US-Canadian tornado outbreak was not a fluke. It was a warning, a reminder that atmospheric violence doesn't respect borders, terrains, or assumptions. It doesn't care if you think you're safe. It will travel over the hills and valleys, cities and forests, towns and farm fields alike. And for those people who lived through it, the memories never fade. The roar of the wind and the screams of splintering wood and the eerie silence afterward. And for those of us who get to tell their story, we do so not just to remember, but to prepare for the day when the skies will darken once again. Everybody, I hope you really liked this video. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and make sure to like and subscribe, ring that bell so you don't miss more content like it in the future. Thanks again, CJ with Florida Man Weather.